Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the solo sophomore album from Jennifer Nettles called Playing with Fire. But first, let's talk a little bit about artistic maturity. Now, this is something I don't really delve into that often, but I think it lurks in the back of the minds of most critics that when an artist reaches a certain age or state of life, that their music's supposed to evolve or mature into something that's got a little bit more weight or wisdom or gravitas, particularly in the songwriting. Now, of course, you'll get some acts that will never change or approach middle age by going wilder than they've ever gone before, and all the more power to them, but it's a fair expectation that at some point, especially in more traditional genres like country, the artists start to grow up at least a little bit. Otherwise, it just kind of gets creepy or weird. And yet, paradoxically, while I think this did kind of happen for Jennifer Nettles, the former singer of pop country group Sugarland, I'm not really sure it was the best choice for her. I remember covering her solo debut album, That Girl, in 2014, and mostly liking it, but her unique vocal tone always seemed more suited to upbeat quirkiness than downbeat, more adult contemporary leaning country music. She wasn't Brandy Clark after all, and so there's a certain sort of irony in noting that instead of changing direction when she left Mercury Nashville for Big Machine, Jennifer Nettles seems to be doubling down, outright bringing on Brandy Clark herself to co-write over half the album. Granted, she was also working with producer Dan Huff, who can argue definitely has a mixed legacy in country music, tending to play towards the poppier side and not really known for subtlety, but hell, it's not like Jennifer Nettles was ever known for subtlety either, and working with Brandy Clark was bound to bring in some of the gravitas or wit that was kind of missing from spots of That Girl. So, on that note, how did Playing with Fire turn out? Really? Better than I think anyone could have possibly expected, myself included, because the transition to Big Machine for this sophomore album was a huge step forward for Jennifer Nettles in terms of being a solo artist. I'll say it right now, Playing with Fire is bound to be one of the most criminally underappreciated albums this year, a pop country gem that not just plays Nettles' strengths, but reveals new ones altogether I didn't know she had. And sure, while many would be quick to point to Brandy Clark's work behind the scenes, it should be noted that Jennifer Nettles co-wrote the majority of songs on this album and brings in a personality and insight to the table to easily stand on her own, enough to push a record that was already pretty damn good into real greatness. I really like this album. So okay, how the hell did this happen? Well, the first major evolution that needs to be discussed is Jennifer Nettles herself, who has improved by leaps and bounds as a singer and a solo stage presence. As a performer, she's always had a huge, broad voice that can blare over everything and overwhelm songs, which has made her a bit of an awkward fit for mid-tempo restraint in the past. And while this album does tilt into that, often to great effect, I was stunned how subtle and emotive she could be on some of the ballads here. There's a lot of complexity coming through in the writing on the wistful frustration of Unlove You, the deeply buried pain of Stupid Girl, the intense hunger of Chaser, and the collapse back into a hookup that has continued to hurt her all over again on Starting Over. And Jennifer Nettles, she nails these songs. That's where we get to tracks like 3 Days in Bed, a Holly Williams cover which has a depth of exhaustion, wanderlust, deeply rooted pain, and idealized fantasy romance that Jennifer Nettles handles incredibly well and recalls some of Reba McEntire's best work. And yet, just like Reba, Jennifer Nettles can belt with the best of them on the title track, the exasperated working mother anthem and the frustration of Drunken Heels with a potent feminist undercurrent, we'll come back to that, and the incredible power ballad Way Back Home, which only reaching the points of extreme loudness and kind of irritability opposite Jennifer Lopez of all people on My House. It's just a little bit too broad and overdone on that song, even if I do appreciate the sentiment, and the two really quite harmonize well. And yet some of that quirkiness that I've always liked with Jennifer Nettles is still here too, especially on the overly plastic, goofy, and yet kind of slyly subversive Sugar. In short, Jennifer Nettles just runs away with this album, and for once the production is on her side. I've had issues with Dan Huff's production before, but he seems to have grasped very early on that playing this album loose, broad, and melodic is the right way to match her voice, and thus gives her plenty of room to breathe without a lot of gimmicks, as well as bringing in some thick and heavy enough guitars, acoustic and electric, in order to match her in the melodies. And while there definitely are some production missteps, that synth on the title track is way too thin to balance out with anything, and the production on the overdubs of Hey Heartbreak is distractingly thin, not helped by the bass groove that takes a little bit too long to balance against the acoustic guitar and the hand clap, but for the most part it rings as remarkably solid with an abundance of some great hooks. Now sure, there are definitely drum machines, and there's a part of me that just wishes they stuck with organic percussion, but for the most part they're either so light to not compromise the flow, or they're often replaced by real drums or strummed acoustic grooves regardless. And the guitar tones are pretty damn great across this album, with real bite and texture, but never to the point where they overwhelm the mix, or the groove itself, especially when they bring in minor progressions like on Chaser. And there's so many great little subtle moments here too. The jaunty piano and subtle pedal steel running through Drunken Heels, the perfect mandolin moment on Stupid Girl, you'll know it when you hear it, the excellent ramshackle layering of the guitars on 3 Days in Bed, the soul touches on Sugar that still have enough bite with a low royal guitar on the bridge, the power ballad bombast that lands incredibly well on Way Back Home, and that subtle key change on Starting Over that gains so much more power for not being overstated. Of course, opposite that, you do have the horns and the clunky stuttered beat that runs through My House, but I'm willing to forgive that song a fair bit, and that ties into the lyrics and themes of this record. And it would have been very, very easy for Jennifer Nettles to make an outright girl power fantasy like so much of Carrie Underwood's pop country. Hell, she's got the firepower in her voice to do it. But Jennifer Nettles and Brandy Clark are both a lot smarter than that, and offer a much more nuanced picture of femininity that might embrace the easy feminist texts of Playing with Fire or Drunken Heels, but can also cut a fair bit deeper. Stupid Girl is a huge standout because it cuts the messages that are often given to young girls to put others first and demean them for their intellect or taking artistic risks, calling them stupid for even trying along the way. And you can tell how Nettles is pushing against it because it's not like she's wrong even if she's branded as stupid. Sugar operates on similar principles of cutting the real pretty domestic sweetness with real spice and celebrating them both as facets of her. And that showcase of vulnerability gives this album a lot of weight. It helps there's real maturity in the writing on this album. Jennifer Nettles is over 40, and that brings the weight of experience to the writing of songs like Unlove You, where she knows that deep down in her mind it's not gonna work, but she still wants something if only just for a little while. Or on Starting Over, where she seems all too aware of the time where she keeps slipping back to an ex that she hoped to leave behind. The weight of time and experience deepens a lot of the impact here, but the glowing standout moments are 3 Days in Bed and Way Back Home. The first very much being a European fantasy where she is looking at a few days of release, even if there is real danger to it. And what I love about the song is that it's not played over the top with any stereotypes or cliches, but with a subtle, quiet, tired loneliness, searching for a moment to make a bad decision for only the release that it could bring. It's the same sort of feminism that showed up on White Lung's last album, Paradise, the push through a country lens instead of punk, for a slightly older audience of women who know, understand, or are prepared to accept the consequences of their actions, which is one of the reasons that Way Back Home connects so well. I normally have a certain resistance to embrace the motherhood songs, but the language that Nettles uses implies that not only she knows what it looks like to everyone else at the gilded cage, but also how the fire has not gone out as she takes off her armor and exposes vulnerability. She's still making her choice and she's gonna own it proudly, and she really makes that song come across incredibly well. Now, do all the songs stick for me? Well, I could nitpick a bit, especially I appreciate the much needed solidarity message on My House. The Jenny from the Block reference was ridiculous 15 years ago, J-Lo, and it's just as ridiculous now. And while I appreciate the nuanced framing and the open-ended question of faith on Salvation Works, it could have used another verse to really tie the disconnecting threads of the story to Nettles herself, but really, this album holds up as stunningly solid. Frankly, I'm stunned more people in both the mainstream and indie country press have not been cheerleading for this album, because while it might dabble in some pop flourishes, it's got the smart writing, solid melodic hooks, and fantastic performances to easily stand out as one of the best pop country releases I've heard in some time. Then I get a very solid 8 out of 10 and a big recommendation from me. I wasn't expecting much from Playing with Fire, but Jennifer Nettles proved that she can handle the blaze and shape it into something very powerful indeed. So definitely check this out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Yeah, I know I'm a little bit late to the punch with this album, but God, I really wanted to cover it. And I got the poll up there so you guys can all tell me what you thought of it, because I really think this record is really kind of awesome. Beyond that, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I will try to give them a listen. Again, there's going to be a lot of country this week, but if there's anything else coming up the radar, I'm curious. Beyond that, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.